Today we're going to talk about super automatic espresso machines, and in particular, we're going to talk about this super automatic espresso machine, the Jura Ena 8, or depending on where you live, you might say the Jura Ena 8. We're going to talk about who this machine and machines like it are for, who they're not for. We're going to give an overview of what it does, and I'm also going to give you some tips on dialing it in to get the best result possible if you own one of these. Now, when you think of an espresso machine, you may think of something like I have back there, and those are called semi-automatic espresso machines. They take care of some things for you, but not everything. You still have to dial in coffee, learn how to make espresso, learn how to steam milk, learn recipes for drinks, all that kind of thing. You actually need a lot of knowledge to learn how to use them, how to make good coffee on them. And often what ends up happening is people who are kind of just getting into espresso or not into that kind of thing end up picking these things up, having a really frustrating experience, returning them and going back to whatever they were using before. Super automatic espresso machines take like every part of that process and fully automate it inside this nice compact little box. You load your coffee in the top, press a little button, and you get a cafe quality drink out of the nozzles here. Generally very tasty, very easy, very convenient. Now, super automatics do make, some compromises here and there in order to facilitate all that automation. We'll talk about what some of those are. But the nice thing about them is it doesn't matter who walks up to this thing, presses that button, you're going to get a tasty drink. With semi-automatic espresso machines, you can get really excellent cafe quality drinks, top tier. You can also get some really bad coffee out of them, depending on how good you are at dialing in or who's using the machine. Bottom line is, if all you want is very good coffee every day, no fuss, you're not looking to pick up a new hobby or anything like that, machines like this can be a really good fit. On this channel, I really have covered a lot of enthusiast level equipment. A lot of that equipment is totally inaccessible to friends and family. I try to explain to them how it works and they're like, that is way too complicated. I'm not into that. Just give me something easy. And so I've been actually thinking to cover these types of machines on here for a little while. I had connected with FAM Canada about a couple projects. They deal these machines, and after some back and forth, they agreed to send one over for me to take a look at. Now, we're actually going to give this machine away once I'm finished using it. So if you're in Canada, you want to hop on my Instagram and keep an eye out for that if it hasn't happened already. But the Ena 8 is made by Jura, who has kind of dominated the super automatic espresso machine space for many, many years. And if you talk to Jura owners, it's very common to hear people say, oh yeah, I got one of those. It's fantastic. Been using it for 10 years. Great coffee, no fuss, love that thing. Now, you do have to keep them serviced and you have to kind of do ongoing maintenance. They are very complicated inside, and we'll talk more about that. Manufacturing and sustainability wise, Jura is a Swiss company. They're manufactured between Switzerland and Portugal. I think these ones are made entirely in Portugal. Obviously, there's a lot of plastic, but very nice feeling appliance overall. Juras are not cheap machines for sure, but the Ena 8 is kind of on their more entry level as far as where the spectrum of machines that they have sit. The Ena 8 comes in at $1,700 US or about $2,700 Canadian. And they are pretty brilliantly easy to use. There's a button up here and you just press it to turn the machine on. It will go through a bit of a warm-up cycle. You make sure that beans are loaded up in here. It will do that startup sequence to kind of clean and purge the machine to kind of keep it running before you get to making drinks. I like to keep a little glass or container handy to catch that bit to prevent it from just filling up the drip tray. But once it's booted up, it's kind of done that sequence to kind of keep everything clean. You just grab a glass. You can raise this up or down to kind of fit whatever size glass you want on here. You press the drink you want and it will make it for you. So I'm just going to make an espresso here. And it will go ahead and make that espresso according to a predefined recipe, which you can adjust. Let's have a sip of this. And for a machine that is as easy basically to use as like a pod machine, this is a really tasty cup of coffee. So there are 15 drinks total that you can make with one of these things. They call them specialties. And as far as straight coffee goes, there's espresso, there's coffee, there's both 2 times espresso and coffee. There's what's called cafe barista. That's more like an Americano, where it will do a shot of espresso and then just put straight water in there. And then there's espresso doppio, which is basically going to grind up 1 shot of espresso, put it in your cup, eject that, and then grind up another shot and then put that in your cup. Now, once it's all done, it kind of spits out the ground coffee. And when you're ready to clean that out, you just pull out the drip tray just like that, and your ground coffee is going to be hiding out in this little bin right here. It's very easy to clean. And then when your drip tray fills up, you can just take it to a sink and tip it out, and it'll run right out the back like that. Now, to do milk drinks, you can take the silicone tube that comes with the Ena 8 and plug it into any old milk container that you got, or you can opt to upgrade to one of Jura's nicer milk containers. They have a range of them. And setting it up is pretty easy. Don't mind my Canadian milk bag here. I'm just gonna fill this up. You can get fancier milk containers that are insulated and all that. They all run a little bit more though. This is kind of their entry-level little container. And what you do is you just take this little tube, you put one end the container like that, and then there's a little plug on here, and you just pull out the little stopper and pop in the tube here. And then you kind of just leave it set there like that. Now, as far as milk drinks go, you can do a cappuccino, you can do a cortado, you can do what's called a latte macchiato. That's a very kind of crowd-pleasing drink. And you can do a flat white. So let's go ahead and let's do this fancy latte macchiato here. So I'm just going to click latte macchiato on the menu. It'll grind up the coffee, and then it will start making the drink. And for this particular recipe, it's going to do some milk first, and it's going to do this cool layering thing. Now, a cool little tidbit on how this milk is working, it doesn't actually suck milk into the machine. It just brings it out into this little nozzle right here. And what it does is it injects it with steam, and then it comes right out here. So there's never any milk that is going to kind of go into your machine and make it gross over time. It's all kind of contained within this little nozzle, which is pretty cool. Easy to clean too. I'll show you that in a sec. So for this particular drink, it's left a little bit of milk in there and given actually some time for the layers to separate. And then it's going to put in some coffee here, and you'll see the coffee kind of sits between almost 2 layers, you know, a layer of foam here at the top and then a thinner layer here at the bottom. It's a larger volume drink. And if you swirl it, you can kind of start to see those layers kind of presenting themselves a little bit. Depending on the glass you use, it's kind of subtle, but it is pretty cool. I'm lactose intolerant though, so I can't drink this. Sarah, do you want this? Yeah? Here, come and get it. Here you go, love.
Thank you.
Enjoy. Now, I found that the system could handle oat and soy milk, no problem, but I found that the frothing and the layering and all that tended to work best with standard dairy milk. Now, as far as cleaning, all you do is you pop the tube off just like that, and you go and give that a rinse. And then as far as this part right here, this front thing comes off, it's just magnetized on there, and then this just pops off right here. And then all you do is you go to the sink. This is the only place that the milk has gone in, is right here inside this little nozzle here, and you rinse it out and then you put it back in. Just slip it on like that, turn it to the side, and then you just slip that back on and you're back in business. It takes about 60 seconds, I would say. You still need to remember to do it. Now on the menu right here, you can kind of flip through a couple pages. There's also some limited settings here that you get by going down here in the corner. If you press and hold a drink, it will give you an option to get in there and adjust some settings. We'll talk more about that when we're talking about dialing in. And you can also move them around. So if the drink that you always use happens to be on the 3rd page, you can move it onto the 1st page. If you want to do an entirely different coffee, say like decaf, you can set it up to use pre-ground coffee instead of the coffee that's in your hopper. In that case, you want to use the ground coffee chute on the top of the machine. So before we get to cons and considerations, who should consider one of these and who shouldn't, let's talk about dialing in and optimizing coffee. I think understanding how to optimize your machine, regardless of whether it's a super automatic or a semi-automatic, is something that can be really helpful. Now, when it comes to coffee, and particularly when it comes to espresso, you kind of have these 2 flavor extremes. You have bitter and you have sour. And ideally, you want your flavor to meet right here in the middle of those 2 and be perfectly balanced. And that's where you get that really good cup of coffee flavor. Now, some of this depends on the actual coffee that you're using. Very dark coffees tend to lean more towards being bitter, and very lightly roasted coffees can tend to be a little bit more sour. But if you get some coffee, you toss it in here, you turn it on, and you're loving the coffee that comes out. You're like, this is fantastic. You don't have to worry about this at all. But if it's not quite hitting that spot for you, how do you get it to that point? This right here is an espresso basket. It's for a semi-automatic machine, very common, standard size, 58 millimeter. And this basket will hold somewhere in the neighborhood of 18 grams of coffee. This is what they call a double basket. The espresso basket inside this machine holds 6 to 10 grams of coffee. It's much less actual ground coffee that is being used every time this makes a drink, which is going to be a bit of a limit, but we can work around that with a little bit of understanding. Now, a traditional Italian single espresso shot is going to be roughly 7 grams of ground coffee and roughly 1 ounce of espresso. And doing that style of espresso is actually very well suited to like a single-sized basket. Now, if you want to get into doing those bigger shots, those big doubles in one pull, you're going to need to look at something more like an E8 or higher in the euro range. If you try and get those really big espresso shots out of this machine using that single basket, you're likely going to end up with coffee that is a little bit weak and likely even a little bit bitter. There's a couple things that you can do about that. Number one, I recommend going into the product settings and turning the strength all the way up. What that's going to do is that's going to tell the grinder to run for longer when it's grinding up the coffee, which is going to result in more coffee inside that basket. If you turn the strength down, the grinder is going to run shorter and it's just going to have a tiny little bit of coffee in the basket. If you're finding the coffee is too strong, you can do that. If you want more closer to that traditional espresso vibe, you want to have that strength turned all the way up, in my experience. Once you've done that, for any kind of espresso drink, I'm going to recommend you actually pull the volume down to like 1 ounce. That's in and around 30 mils, so that's about as close as you can get to that traditional espresso single ratio, and it should result in a much more strong and balanced flavor. Now, if you actually just want just more coffee than that, more volume, you can do the 2x espresso or the espresso doppio, and that will kind of do 2 shots in a row to fill up that glass a little bit more. Now, if you do that and your coffee is still actually coming out really bitter, I'm going to recommend turning the grind control this way, counterclockwise. That'll coarsen your grind and it should hopefully ease up on that bitterness. Now, if it's still bitter after that, maybe switch to a more lightly roasted coffee. Now, if you're feeling like your coffee is sour or not strong enough, you can make your grind finer. And for the coffees that I like, lighter to medium roast, that's where I was finding the best results. Now, if you adjust the strength, the volume, and you have your grind as fine as possible, and it still is coming out a little bit sour, you could switch to a darker roasted coffee. You can also turn the drink volume up to push a little bit more water through there, and that will help even it out, even if you do lose a little bit of strength. Now, the Ena 8 will remember all of those settings, so once you set something a certain way, it will remember it until you change it, but you do need to go into each drink and set it a certain way by drink. So just a little note there. If you're into like big black cups of coffee or like a filter style coffee cup, you'll probably start with the coffee setting on here, the coffee drink button. I'm going to actually recommend you use the Cafe Barista. Give that a try. With the coffee drink setup, what it does is it just keeps pushing water through that same 10 grams of coffee until it fills up your whole mug, and that can end up with very over extracted and bitter coffee. Cafe Barista will pull a balanced espresso shot into your cup and then top it up with hot water, giving you a lot more like an Americano, much more balanced flavor. Now, all that dialing in aside, you may just hear that and your eyes may glaze over and you think, you know what, I think I'm good with it, however it spat it out. And I gotta be honest, this one is not pulled to spec. I dropped a new coffee in there, didn't spend a lot of time dialing it in, just kind of went with it, and it's super tasty. Could I get a better shot on my semi-automatic espresso machine? Of course, but that thing costs way more money. It's way more complicated to use. And I know that regardless of whether I'm using this thing or anybody in my family is walking up to it and pressing the button, the coffee is going to come out the same way. So it depends what matters to you. Now, let's talk about cons and considerations when it comes to this machine and machines like it. These machines are super automatic. They clean themselves, they take all of that control away from you and give you a very repeatable, very consistent result. Maybe could you do better yourself? Sure, if you're very experienced, but that positioning is kind of wrapped up in how the machine is. So if you're the type of person that you really want to get in there, you like tweaking stuff, you like adjusting everything, optimization, machines like this, maybe not for you. You might be more better to go down the semi-automatic path. Now, as convenient as super automatics are, kind of setting aside, maybe you're not going to get that same peak espresso quality that you can get out of a semi-automatic machine. They do have another shadow side, and that is maintenance. These machines are very complicated inside. They're automating a lot of stuff. There's a lot of moving parts in there. And in order for them to last a long time, it will self-do a certain amount of maintenance, but you also need to have the responsibility of maintaining the machine well. That's part of owning one of these things. If your water isn't up to par, for example, you want to make sure you're using the water filter in here. You want to make sure you're rinsing that milk thing out regularly. You want to make sure that you're doing the cleaning cycle with the right cleaning product when it tells you to. And if you maintain them properly, they will run for years and years and years. And you hear lots of stories of people with these things who are in that situation, but you do need to maintain them properly. It's not like a Keurig machine that you get on Amazon, for sure. And maintenance and support is one area where Jura really does stand apart compared to some of those lower cost machines and super automatics that you can get on places like Amazon. When you take this drip tray cover off, you take this thing off just like this, and right in here, there's a little sticker with several support lines depending on what geography you happen to be in. I was digging in with FAMA Canada about this because, I know that there's a lot in a machine like this that can go wrong. So, I wanted to kind of figure out how that happened in the event of an issue. And, they have things like these heated drop boxes that you can put your machine in all year, any time of day, and their tech will come and take it out, service it, give it back to you in a day, a couple days or whatever, and put it back in this box, and you can come and pick it up when it's good for you. You get almost like a lot more of like almost a white glove treatment when it comes to service and support when you get this level of machine. Couple other really quick cons. If you turn the machine on and it does its startup sequence and then you grab the water tank to go and refill it, it won't stop that sequence and it will kind of pull some air through the tubes. Now, when you put it back on, it fixes itself, not a huge issue, but that did catch me off guard one time. Also, when you have this thing out, if you go and empty this and then put it back in without this wastebasket in, it will actually just dump the coffee in there without that. So that's something you got to pay attention to too. Also, if you're drinking those really big black coffees, the water reservoir is just over a liter. So if you're doing espresso, that'll last for a long time. But if you're doing these big drinks that are a lot of water, you're going to go through that reservoir a little bit more quickly. And if you want to use different coffee than is loaded in your hopper, because you can't switch that out, you're going to need to use the pre-ground coffee chute at the top of the machine. Overall, I was really kind of surprised by this machine. I'll be honest, if anything, I was a little bit predisposed against super automatics. I'm a semi-automatic guy. I like getting in there, having absolute control over every aspect of my espresso and coffee making, and giving up that control was just something that I thought, the result's not going to be very good. The experience is not going to be very good. I'm not sure I'm into this. Maybe it's good for some people. I don't really see a place for it. That's kind of how I was feeling about it. And, can I make a better shot of espresso on my Pro espresso setup? Sure, of course. That's not really the point with these things. Nobody else can use my Pro espresso setup. And what I really liked about this thing is anybody in my house can walk up to it, press a button, and have it spit out a coffee that I knew was going to be delicious. We have family over quite often, and very often we'll put on a big batch brew of filter coffee and just kind of let people serve themselves. And while I had this and we were here testing, and I thought, I'm just going to leave that out there and let people walk up to it and use that, and they can serve themselves, espresso drinks. And it was a big hit, and I didn't need to make a single cup of coffee, and everybody was very happy. That consistency, that ease of use, and the quality that it delivers at, very good. So who should consider this machine and who shouldn't? I think if you want excellent coffee every day, if you want a smooth, seamless, one-touch experience, if you value convenience, if you want cafe quality drinks that are nicer than you can get out of an espresso setup or a drip coffee machine, machines like this are a really great option. If you're looking for a new hobby, you want to get into a platform that you can kind of understand and expand upon, add bits on, tweak over time, I might say a semi-automatic machine could be a better fit. Now, when it comes specifically to Jura and the Ena 8, even though this is kind of closer to the entry level as it comes to Jura machines, it's definitely not a cheap machine. It is going to give you an excellent experience, and on the service and support standpoint, the longevity, it's bringing a lot to the table. Jura has been in this game for a long time, and they're widely regarded kind of as being more at the top of that game. Also, if where you want to put your coffee machine is actually just physically small, this is a pretty compact footprint too, so that is something to consider as well. Overall, I'd love to hear what you think of the Ena 8, especially if you're an owner or a long-term owner of a Jura machine. I would love to hear from you in the comments, so make sure you drop me your feedback down there below, especially if I forgot something. Let me know if you'd like to see more content about super automatics on the channel, and if so, what specifically would be helpful. I hope your next cup of coffee is fantastic, and we'll see you next time.